Welcome to the Damascus Road podcast. On the road to Damascus, Paul had a radical encounter with Jesus and his life was changed forever. That is what we hope and pray for here. Now, on to this week's episode. So earlier this year, we took a family trip to Kansas City to visit my parents. It was the first full week of work that I have taken off in 8 years, and it was wonderful. We ate a bunch of delicious barbecue. We went to the Kansas City Zoo. We saw some old friends, saw a performance of Dreamgirls at a local dinner theater, and my dad and I toured a local brewery where we got to sample many of their delicious beers, and they even did little food pairings for us and stuff, and taught us the proper way to taste beer, which was really cool and informative and a lot of fun. But one of the biggest highlights was taking a trip to Kirksville, Missouri, where Eric and I, along with Brad and Lacey and Ryan, all attended Truman State University together. Eric and I hadn't been back to visit Kirksville in 18 years, and we were really excited to show our daughter where we went to school, where the campus ministry and church we attended were, and just to explore the campus and town together again, seeing what has changed and what hadn't changed in our small college town in the last 2 decades. It was amazing the flood of memories and emotions that brought me right back to those 4 years in my life as we walked around the town. Emotions and experiences that you may have felt yourself or you might be experiencing right now. Things like living in the dorms, making new friends, stressing over homework, tests, and finals, getting butterflies in your stomach when you meet that cute boy or girl, getting your first apartment, staying up way too late, hanging out with friends, pulling all-nighters, waking up late for class, sleeping through class, sleeping through church. Clearly not an issue for a few of you here this morning. Figuring out the minimum amount of reading you can do and still pass a class. That was one of my specialties in college. Hoping and praying a teacher is going to grade on a curve, and being a poor college student. I was actually surprised when that memory of that last one came back to me a little bit when we were up there. Memories of shopping at Walmart, one of 2 grocery stores in our small college town, and by far the cheapest. Seeing how long I could make a loaf of bread and jars of peanut butter and jelly last. I know I was fortunate and my dad paid for my college, and I thank him for that. I never really wanted for anything, but that doesn't mean I still had a bunch of extra cash laying around when I was in college. I still had to get a job at Subway to pay my bills, and I made sure to stop by and pay my respects when we were there as well. I was making minimum wage, which at the time was $5.15 an hour, and I was probably only working like 12 to 15 hours a week. But being a sandwich artist was actually the darn near perfect job to have while I was in college. If memory serves me right, we could go in and I could make myself a sandwich, whether I was working that day or not, at any time. And I know it was 20 years ago, but I think it was $1.50 for a 6-inch sub, a bag of chips, and a drink. That is ridiculously cheap. By today's standards and even by 2000 standards. Better yet, my boss really, really liked me, and every time I went to the cash register to pay, she said, "No, Dave, don't worry about it." So I literally survived on free Subway for 3.5 years. And I somehow still eat it to this day. But looking back, I was really doing okay, right? I was able to afford non-Subway food. I could go out to eat occasionally with my friends. I could go see movies and concerts that I wanted to see. Sure, there were times that money was tight and that I had to choose to not do something that people were doing if I didn't have the money, but I was never in danger of going hungry, and I was never in danger of not having a roof over my head. Because most of us, when we use the word poor, we're using it as a relative term. We love to blur the lines between the haves and the have-nots, but there's still a big difference between not having money to do some of the things we would like to do and not having enough for basic human necessities, like a roof over our head or knowing where our next meal is going to come from. Living in a wealthy country like America often makes not having some feel like not having enough, and we feel poor by comparison. Even when we are poor college students, our experience is still really far removed from the struggles of others. We still have food, we still have shelter, and we still have our education to keep us moving forward. But real poverty exists in our country, in our state, and in our town, and we make it all too easy to ignore. If we choose to, and we often do, it is not hard to isolate ourselves from the plight of those in our communities. Food and shelter are a real concern for people no more than a few steps away from our neighborhoods and from the edges of campus. It is easy to keep them at an arm's length, and we set up rules to keep the struggling off of campus or zone our subdivisions and our neighborhoods to keep them out so it can clearly be someone else's problem. The government and local authorities will take them away and take care of them for us, right? After all, it's not a problem that any of us can solve, and just trying to fix it would be impossible. And if we can't solve the problem, what are we to do anyway? What is our responsibility in caring for our neighbor's needs? What does the Bible, and more importantly, Jesus, have to say about the poor and how we can care for them? What does doing good works and helping those in need really look like, and what does it have to do with our faith? As we continue our series, A Cheerful Heart this morning, we're going to dive into these questions and explore what it means to serve and bless the hearts of the poor and needy, and how Jesus might call our faith into action. Do we put our faith into action outside of ourselves and outside of this building that we call church? Do we allow our faith to compel us to do more? Should our faith in Jesus compel us to do more? Short answer, yes. Long answer, also yes. Historically, the church post-Reformation hasn't always talked about what we do, as in doing good deeds, well, because it often comes in a conversation about salvation and how we are saved by God's grace alone and not by anything that we do. And of course, that is 100% true, but it can also lead us to believe that we then don't have to do anything. James talks about this in his letter to early Christians. What good is it, dear brothers and sisters, if you say you have faith but don't show it by your actions? Can that kind of faith save anyone? Suppose you see a brother or sister who has no food or clothing, and you say, "Goodbye, have a good day, stay warm, and eat well." But then you don't give that person any food or clothing. What good does that do? So you see, faith by itself isn't enough. Unless it produces good deeds, it is dead and useless. James illustrates how it is not useful to have faith, but to fail to take action. If someone is suffering and a believer merely wishes them well, rather than helping, what good is that? If we do not add action into our faith grows cold and inert. A true, full faith should inspire action. And I don't think it's a coincidence here that James uses the example of the poor here in this verse. Suppose you see a brother or sister who has no food or clothing, and you say, "Goodbye, have a good day, stay warm, and eat well." I think we'd all agree that if we saw someone struggling like that and said that to them, that'd be a pretty big jerk move. But how many times have we done the same, just not in so many words? I don't know about you, but this kind of hits me as kind of a parallel of our modern politicized statement, thoughts and prayers. You know, that empty statement that gets thrown around when something bad happens in our world. Prayer is significant, and it is powerful, and it shouldn't be merely dismissed. But when it is not accompanied by action and tangible help that we can actually offer, it's just virtue signaling. We say we'll send out thoughts and prayers to a marginalized group of people, to the war-torn country, or to those who are suffering, but we end up doing nothing, or we don't care to do anything. We shouldn't just ask for miraculous provision from God when we can meet the need or take action that is aligning with our prayers. Sometimes this is willful, and other times it is caused just by lack of structure or education. We see the unhoused, we hear about the war-torn country, and we want to help, but we don't know how. And unfortunately, our world doesn't incentivize us to find out how to help. So think about the last time you walked past one of our houseless neighbors on the street or in a park. Did you do anything? Did you ignore them? Did you cross to the other side of the street or the other side of the area to avoid a potentially awkward situation? The Bible has a lot to say about the poor that doesn't really line up with the American narrative on poverty. Proverbs tells us not to avoid, but to speak up. Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves. Ensure justice for those being crushed. Yes, speak up for the poor and the helpless and see that they get justice. But have I ever really done that? I work just off a Grant, just west of I-10. And there's a pretty significant unhoused population that camps along the path that the Santa Cruz River runs there, just on the west side of I-10. And there's always multiple people panhandling in intersections. Most mornings when I get to work, there's at least one person, if not more, sleeping on the sidewalk outside of my shop. There's a Quick Trip directly next door to our building, and there's always people out there asking for change. QT is good about letting anybody, because we live in the Arizona climate, anybody come in and fill up a cup or a bottle of water for free, which is great, and water is an absolute necessity for people, but people need more than water too. I remember how surprising it was the first time I was in there, and I saw a person in need get caught stealing while I was there. It broke my heart. Now, over the course of 8 years that I've been working there and gone over to that Quick Trip, it has happened so many times that I'm pretty numb to it, and I've become pretty numb to it, as have all the workers that work at that Quick Trip. In the past, I've tried to do something to help. I've bought a couple bottles of water, handed it out to the people who are there outside, maybe given them a snack or something. But if I'm honest with you, it's been way too long since I've done something like that. And most days I have a tendency just to walk by them, and it becomes an increasingly easy thing to do with every passing day. Maybe it would be easier to have compassion or to meet their needs if they were asking for food and drink instead of just money or change. I don't know. People do need money to survive, but I, like many people, have less and less reason to carry cash around to give, even if we wanted to. And then there's the old adage that if you give someone money, they're just going to spend it on drugs or alcohol or whatever vice got them into their present situation, right? And that's fair to take into account. We don't want to encourage bad habits or unhealthy decisions in people who are already struggling. Jesus tells us in Matthew, "But if you cause one of these little ones to who trusts in me to fall into sin, it would be better for you to have a large millstone tied around your neck and be drowned in the depths of the sea." But while we surely don't want to encourage sin, Christians sometimes use this verse out of context as a reason not to give. And I get it. It can be hard not to be cynical about what someone might use our hard-earned resources for, right? Panhandling isn't directly correlated with homelessness, and giving to panhandlers doesn't reduce homelessness. It is better to give to support systems and learn how to effectively direct people to appropriate places where they can find aid. Yes, it is good to be wise about what and how we give, but I think we overthink that sometimes too. I don't think it's healthy for us to be so hyper-focused on certain outcomes that may or may not come to pass that it paralyzes us from doing anything at all. Sometimes God calls us to give regardless of the situation. Sometimes the Holy Spirit prompts us to do something right away, right in the moment. And like action should be a natural outpouring of our faith, action is obedience to God. Sometimes God just wants us to obey him, and sometimes that means giving in the moment. Don't ignore that nudge from the Holy Spirit. And I know that the poor are more than just the houseless neighbors we see outside convenience stores or standing by at the median on the road. They are just the ones that I see every day, day in and day out, that God has somehow put into my life for me to consider how I might act to best serve them. There are people with a roof over their head that don't know where their next meal is coming from. Mothers who can't afford diapers or formula for their children. Families who are in danger of having their electricity shut off, keeping them from having air conditioning in the summer or heat in the wintertime. And even if we think everyone is okay, the truth is that many people are just one emergency cost away from homelessness. One big car repair or medical cost can destabilize someone who is doing just fine before. What prevents that emergency from becoming severe poverty and homelessness is their connection to community, is their access to people who care about them and people who know how to help. We can be those people. But if we are staying in the comfort of our neighborhoods or campus, homes or dorms, or even in the comfort of our church walls, we can insulate ourselves from what needs to be done and how we can work to be a part of a force for good. James calls faith without action dead and useless. And when I read that, man, that sure sounds harsh to me. But John echoes the same sentiment. We know what real love is because Jesus gave up his life for us. So we also ought to give up our lives for our brothers and sisters. If someone has enough money to live well and sees a brother or sister in need but shows no compassion, how can God's love be in that person? Dear children, let's not merely say we love each other. Let us show the truth by our actions. Let us not merely say we love each other. Let us not merely say we should care for the poor. Let us show the truth by our actions. It's not getting easier out there for people. With inflation, corporate greed, wage inequality, the cost of healthcare, the housing crisis, the gap between those who have and those that don't is not getting smaller. Christians should be on the front line of these issues, fighting for justice, just like that verse in Proverbs says. Because someone will see it, not because someone will see us doing it, but because it is the right thing to do. Our culture treats the poor as not good enough, as less than, as a mere result of the bad decisions they've made for themselves, and as a problem that will just go away if we ignore it. Whereas Jesus sees them as a precious creation of God, created in his image. So much so that Jesus tells us that serving the poor is serving him. Then the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father. Inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you fed me. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me into your home. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you cared for me. I was in prison, and you visited me." Then these righteous ones will reply, "Lord, when did we ever see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? Or a stranger and show you hospitality, or naked and give you clothing? When did we ever see you sick or in prison and visit you?" And the king will say, "I tell you the truth, when you did it to one of the least of these my brothers and sisters, you were doing it to me." I don't know about you, but I often, when I read the Bible, I read Jesus' words, I often don't read them with much inflection. I read them with great reverence. But I'm really struck at the end of this passage by the exclamation mark. I imagine Jesus saying this in celebration and exuberance because this is the natural outpouring of his love that he delights to see in his followers. And this is all not to make you feel guilty about what you are or aren't doing for those that are less fortunate, or for driving by the beggar at the intersection, or not donating time or money to a worthy charity. The series, after all, is called A Cheerful Heart, right? Our faith should inspire us and move us to act and to serve with joy. And the amazing thing about service is that it makes the people you are serving and you feel good when you do it. In high school, we had to do a certain number of community service hours every semester, all 4 years. And I had a good friend of mine, who was reluctant to do it, not because she didn't believe in helping people, but because she always felt bad about feeling good when she was helping people. That wasn't the point of service, she said, and she had a hard time reconciling that. And while the way it makes us feel helping others shouldn't be the primary reason that we serve, I was one to tell her, just take the win. You're doing good and you're putting God's love back into the world, and doing so makes you smile. What is the harm in that? When we serve every month at the mobile food bank as a family, which I'll talk a little bit more about here in a minute, it is simultaneously heartbreaking to see the same food insecure people come to get food every month. And it is also incredibly heartwarming to see the joy and gratitude on so many faces as we load boxes of food into their cars. And if we, as followers of Jesus, aren't doing something to produce that kind of gratitude and joy in the lives of those in need, we need to examine why. Is it a fear? Is it a lack of time? Is it lack of resources? Do we feel that we just won't make a difference? Jesus is clear that when we follow him, we are called into action, to do good work in his name, especially serving and meeting the needs of the poor and the less fortunate. I know that I can't meet every need of the struggling people I see outside my work, but I need to not stand by idly either. How can we effectively make a difference? How can we tangibly live out our faith through doing good? There are things that we can do to help immediate needs. There are things we can do to change our mindset, and action we can take to influence the way we as a community and a country deal with poverty. I want to highlight a few of these things this morning here for us to consider. Something we can do to immediately help is find a way to help those in need and serve joyfully. This might be the most obvious application point in this message, right? It's shocking that I'm telling you to try and do something like this. Our community is filled with people in all different stages of life, which is awesome. So this might look different for everybody here, depending on where you are in your life. You may easily have some extra income that you can donate to an organization that is doing good groundwork for those in need. Maybe money isn't the resource you have right now, so it's time that you can give. My family does both. We, every month, give to Blood Water, which is a mission organization that works to get clean water and clean blood to communities in Africa that are in need. But, like I said, we also serve at the mobile food bank every month. I don't want to say I was skeptical when we first started doing the food bank, but since we've been doing it, it has become easily one of the easiest, most effective, and worthwhile things I think I have ever been a part of in service. And it just so happens, like Derek said this morning in announcements, it's coming up this weekend. We pack boxes on Friday morning and we distribute them out just a block away outside the Global Center on Saturday. So let me make my pitch. If you haven't been, or you have, come try it out this weekend. Next weekend is the weekend before Thanksgiving, and there are people in our Tucson community who do not have the resources to put on a great meal like we are so often used to having. They don't have the resources to put that on their table for their family. They rely on the kindness of caring ministries through our church to give them food to supplement their meals and feed their families. I talked about the joy that I feel seeing how blessed people are when they come to get food. That keeps me going. That keeps me coming back month after month. I may not always be super pumped about getting up earlier than I normally would on a Saturday to do it, but the smile on my face by the time we are done distributing food is always genuine. Because one of the things I do is I do my best not to be cynical about those that come to the food bank, whether they drive up in a car that struggles to start or they drive up in their Tesla. Yes, we've had some people come in a Tesla. Because the reality is, for the food bank, no one is taking food away from someone that needs it. They are just keeping good food from being thrown away and wasted. It's not an issue of scarcity, but it's an issue of distribution. And we are helping get food to anybody who wants it or needs it. So when you serve, trust that the people you are serving are doing the best they can with what they have. And treat them like the beautiful creations of God that they are. Our attitudes and mindsets are determine our joy. And if we are determined to be joyful in our service, we will be. And if we are determined to see Jesus in the people we are serving, he will certainly be there. So even if it's not the food bank, I encourage you to look for an opportunity, whether on campus, in your neighborhood, or somewhere, to serve and get out and do good deeds. Next, something we can do is change our mindset about poverty and the role we play in it. Now, you might be saying to yourself, Dave, I do not contribute to other people's poverty. That is not something I do. And while we may feel like that we do not, that might not actually be the case. In his book, Poverty by America, professor and author Matthew Desmond looks at the question as to why there is so much poverty in America. And his short answer is, because we want it that way. We choose for this to be the world that we live in. He says, as the wealthiest country on earth, the level of poverty in the United States is not by accident, but an intentional byproduct of the system we've created. Everything from taxes and welfare to banking deregulations and mortgages are framed in a way to help those with plenty and hurt those with little. It's easy to blame the rich, but they are not the ones responsible. We all are. And when I read this and heard him in a podcast, it's kind of hard for my mind to wrap around. And I think this is hard for any of us to wrap our minds around because we've been taught for years to frame the narrative around poverty and the poor's role in it, not ours. We've been taught to think about that narrative in a different way. So let's take the taxes, for example. He mentioned that in his quote. While us older folks here in this room are probably a little more versed in the U.S. tax code and the tax breaks that we receive, some of you younger folks here in this room might think, that's not part of my story yet. But think about it. There are tax breaks for student loans. There are tax breaks for college savings accounts. And if you have a job or have had a job, you've paid taxes. So tax breaks just aren't about capital gains and about taxing the 1%, though I think that would be something that would be helpful. They're often about a lot of privileged Americans. According to Desmond, when you add up all the tax breaks that the government gives, we as a country spend about $1.8 trillion on tax breaks every year. That is way more than we spend on all the social programs for the needy. And he says, so we have this imbalanced welfare state where we give the most to the families who need it the least. And many of us are a part of that story, whether we like to recognize it or not. We are not taught to think about these things in this way. But tax deductions cost the government money and put it back into our pocket. We need to think and talk about this differently than we do. Changing our narrative is not easy, but is something necessary. We like to think it is better for us to have that money than the government have that money. But what reduces homelessness and poverty is affordable housing. It's emergency aid for people who experience something like a medical emergency or an unexpected expense. And those are things that the government could perhaps provide if they had more resources to do so. Also, so do we need to reframe our attitudes around zoning laws that are keeping certain types of people outside of our communities? Do we need to step up efforts to support social programs and make them easier to access than they are right now? Desmond said, a lot of people say, well, it's not hard to do these things, to apply for these programs. He said, okay, then you try. He said, if you go to a welfare office, you see the amount of paperwork, you see those things. They're not easy for the people who are trying to get the help. We need to make that stuff easier too. It does not seem like these things involve us or benefit us, but they do. So we need to do some work to see what we might unknowingly be contributing to the poverty of others. I'm not standing here and going to tell you to stop taking all the tax breaks that the government provides you when you go to do your taxes. But we should absolutely start talking about these things differently and educate ourselves on what programs are actually helpful so we can support them, maybe with some of that money we're getting back. Perhaps reading Poverty by America by Matthew Desmond, or listening to his interview on the Holy Post podcast. If you look that up, that was very informative to me and a great place to start. It was pretty enlightening to me. Finally, some action we can take that I think kind of ties this all together is flex the influence we have. It may not feel like it, but every one of us has a little bit of influence somewhere. It may be in class, it may be in church, it may be at our jobs, but we are all capable of influence. How can you flex your influence to help the people who could really need our solidarity? Maybe you work for the university, and it's worth looking into, if you can find the information, to how much U of A pays their landscapers. Does the company they use pay a living wage? Maybe it's time we start changing our shopping habits and research companies and stores that do right by their workers. Do it and share what you find. Don't brag about it, but let others know about it. If we're doing it and not telling people about these resources and things that we're finding, then it's not going to spread. It's not going to make a difference. Going to a zoning board meeting sounds like a pretty darn boring thing to me. But do you know who's going to those meetings? The segregationists who are trying to build walls to keep certain types of people out of their neighborhoods. And they're surely going to those meetings, and they're surely speaking up. Why can't we go and be a voice for those who are undervalued, underrepresented, and underheard? Find your place of influence and be a voice for those who so desperately need it and need to be heard. Jesus did it, and so should we. A couple months ago, I was talking to my coworker, Sally. Now, Sally is a wonderful woman in her mid-60s with a giant heart. She spearheads efforts every year to raise money for struggling coworkers, or if a coworker has a family member in need. And she organizes bake sales, and it's just brings in food, and people give money, and it's wonderful. She's also very involved every Christmas when we adopt a family or find a charity to support as a business that people give to. And she regularly comes and helps at the food bank, which is wonderful. So if you've been there in the past couple of years, you've most likely met Sally, and she has a wonderful, big, caring heart. This particular day that I stopped by her office, I just wanted to say hi, and I was going to ask her if she was planning on helping at the upcoming food distribution. But Sally quickly told me about how the night before she stopped at that Quick Trip right next to work to fill up her car. While she was standing in line to prepay, she noticed a woman at the counter with her children counting out pennies, nickels, and dimes to pay for 1 gallon of gas. She said it was clear that this woman was not just trying to get rid of some change. Said this was clearly all she could scrape together to put even just a little bit of gas in her car. She told me how heartbreaking it was to see, and then said, I should have done something. I should have walked up and given her $5 or $10 or just had them swipe my card to fill up her car. I should have helped. I thought about it, but I didn't. I could tell this was significantly weighing on her, and I've known that feeling. I've been there too, and when I felt the Holy Spirit nudge me to do something, but I declined to act. So I told her about one of my favorite song lyrics, this lyric that I've mentioned up here in messages before, which is, all I want from tomorrow is to get it better than today. I reminded her about all the good that she does for others, and that it says a lot about her character that she was beating herself up about this one moment. I reminded her that when we are faced with these moments, we can't go back and change what has happened, but what we can promise to do is we can promise ourselves to do better next time. Because there will be a next time. There is brokenness and need all around us, and unfortunately, that is not going away. We will be faced with an opportunity, and God will nudge us to take action. So regardless of what opportunities we may have missed in service of the poor and the needy, we all have an opportunity to go out from here today to do better, to go do good works. The good works God calls us to do in his name as a natural outpouring of our faith. Let's get better at this as Christians. Let's get better at this as a church community. May we be people who stand up for the poor, act on their behalf, and bless their hearts, souls, and lives, just as Jesus did. Please pray with me. Dear Heavenly Father, I thank you that you call us into action as a natural outpouring of our faith in you. You acted to save us from our sin and from ourselves, and the least we could do is go out and serve and act in solidarity with the people that need our help and our voice, Lord. May you just put it on our hearts this week, as we get close to Thanksgiving and as we get close to Christmas. May you put it on our hearts that what we might do to help those in need and what that looks like for us. May we be open to that, your Holy Spirit moving, that when we feel the nudge, when we feel the call to do something, that we respond, that we act, and that we are obedient to you. Pray this all in your name. Amen. Thank you for joining the Damascus Road podcast. Our mission is to follow Jesus together by being with God, loving everyone, transforming people, developing leaders, growing new ministries, and changing the world. You can find out more about us online at DamascusRoadTucson.com.